Oh, what's up, guys? Josh Lau here with TheCardGuyz, and today we're going to be talking about the recently spoiled Warrior Majestic attack reaction Provoke. Now, this is a card that took me quite a while to unpack. On paper, it seems quite simple, but I think we have to look very closely at the play patterns, and really, this is a card that I think is going to be very, very skill demanding to use properly, kind of similar to Emboldened Blade. This is a card that also is going to be difficult to see the exact value of in game. So it's going to take quite a while to learn how to play with this card properly. And I think this is a card that's really going to reward warriors that know when to block with this card, when to pitch it, and when to play it. Because this is a card that I think, depending on the circumstances, can do all three things. So let's first read the card, and then we'll talk about a few things overall. And then I'm going to talk about Provoke in Dawnblade Dory, and then I'm going to talk about Provoke in Dual Wield Warrior. Because I think there are two main applications to this card, and they are quite different. Okay, so Provoke is a 1-cost blue pitch 3-block warrior attack reaction at Majestic Rarity that says if you are attacking with a weapon this chain link, which for Dawnblade Dory and for Dual Wield Warrior is going to be pretty much all the time. Spoiler alert, I don't think this card is very playable in Bolton, so we'll kind of move we'll let him have his Warcry Bolana. It says if you're attacking with a weapon this chain link, the defending hero reveals a card from their hand. If it is an action card, add it to the chain link as a defending card, otherwise they discard it. So this is the first card of it. Well, I guess the first card that would rip a card from hand is Siren's Call. But this Siren's Call is not guaranteed, and you can't play Siren's Call against red and yellow-based decks. And there's some risk, because if they don't have a blue, your Siren's Call didn't do anything. Whereas Provoke, in almost all circumstances, unless they have all instances, or they're playing Kano and they just go off, this card is going to get a lot of value. In terms of floor. The floor of this card is quite high, and the ceiling is even higher. Now, the thing is, the floor, what I mean by the floor is high. The floor of this card is you're going to 1-for-1 your opponent in general, right? Now, obviously, you do have to be attacking with a weapon, which means you kept a card to attack, and depending on the circumstances of the game, pitching a card to swing through weapon may not be the best, right? But the floor of this card really is trading 1-for-1 with your opponent. But the ceiling of this card is much, much higher than I think a lot of people realize. Because if we look at the typical patterns for Flesh and Blood, okay? So let's say your opponent doesn't block. So generally that indicates they are scared of reprise, or they think they can't block you out, like they don't have a D-react, or they like their hand. Those are the three main scenarios, right? Provoke does well into all three scenarios. So if they want to keep their hand, this basically will tear it apart. Now, let's also take a look at another situation where your opponent blocks they put some cards in front of your attack. They have a plan for the other cards, typically, especially if we look at the speed at which your opponent blocks. Now, if your opponent blocks really quickly, generally that indicates that they either have a very, very clear line, or that they want to block your second attack with the cards and just pass the turn, basically, right? You can get some information based on how they block, which one it is. But let's say they want to block with 2 cards and attack with 2 cards. Provoke could literally... The ceiling on this card, I'm not sure what the ceiling is, but it is quite high, because it messes up your opponent's turn, which gives you tempo, which allows you to, in general, if a warrior has tempo, that is extremely good. The benefits of playing this card is going to look different in Dawnblade Dory and in Dual Wield. So we're going to talk about both of them. But basically, all the situations that you play this card in are going to be pretty good. Now, obviously, this is a blue block 3. It can slot into this. Let's just be frank, Warrior has a lot of bad blues. So this really is kind of take your pick on what this replaces, right? Probably replaces Precision Press, might replace Iron Song Response, might replace Truce, it might replace, Blue Blade Runner or something like that, right? So there's a lot of choices. And yeah. All right, so let's break it down for each Warrior deck, because I think they both play quite differently. So let's take a look at that now. Okay, so Provoke in Dawnblade Dorinthia. So let's first take a look at, well, I put a couple cards up on the screen. As you can see, Singing Steelblade, Iron Song Response, and Glint the Quicksilver are some of the most powerful cards in Dawnblade Dorinthia. The downside is that all 3 of these require Reprise. Now, Provoke can get you Reprise, which is kind of the simplest way to do it, right? You guarantee you draw a card with Glint. Singing Steelblade allows you to tutor for whatever, be it Glint or Iron Song Response, depending on the situation. Now, this is going to be very, very card intensive, right? Because you need another blue. You need the Provoke and the Singing Steelblade. So this is a card that is going to require you to set up a little bit, put a combo piece into Arsenal, and wait for another one to have a nice 2-card play. But Provoke synergizes very well with all the Reprise cards, obviously. And of note, if Provoke causes them to block with a 3-block, Singing Steelblade into Iron Song Response is 4, which could force out a D-React. If you provoke a 4-block, which is going to be a D-React, then you can just save your Singing Steelblade for next turn. If you provoke a 2-block, well, then Iron Song Response gets over it, and it forces a D-React from them. So all these situations are really, really good for Dawnblade Dorinthia. There's another small synergy I want to talk about, Commanding Performance. This was the TheCardGuyz spoiler from Heavy Hitters. A card that it's seen a little bit of play. Most decks run 2, some run 3, but this is not a ubiquitous card in Dawnblade Door because the reds are very constrained. But we could see an uptick in Commanding Performance play because this is basically build your own CNC, right? So you play Commanding Performance, swing, and you provoke them into blocking with an attack action card. So, or at the very least, you force them to reveal a card that they may not have wanted to reveal. So, seems pretty good to me. Now, I do need to mention that this is a card that costs 1, right? And you need to make the decision of playing this during blocks, right? So the way the turn cycle in Flesh and Blood works is that you have to block and then you get to attack back with cards that you kept, right? So you need to make the judgment call, and the correct judgment call, that playing Provoke will get you more value than simply blocking with it or pitching it. And this is going to depend very heavily on what your opponent is playing, what equipment they have available, whether they have an arsenal, how they've tended to play the game in general. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to, formulate in your mind whether to block or play this card. But like I said, I think the card has a pretty high floor. So in general, I think you are going to try to play these out. However, I think the dual wield deck is even more incentivized to play this out, and we'll kind of get into that. Let's just get into it right now. Okay, so let's talk about Provoke in the dual wield warrior. So this is Sabers or Hatchet Dory. Sabers Sabers slash combo Bolton, Sabers Kasai, and Sabers or Hatchet Olympia. Now, obviously, Fang can play this as well, but we currently do not have enough information about the hero. We don't even know his weapons at the current moment. So we'll assume that Fang probably can use this similarly to the dual wield warriors. So I put up a couple cards here. Valiant Dynamos. Now, why did I put Valiant Dynamos up on the screen? Well, because dual wield warriors want the game to go as long as possible, and they want the game to be fair. So what do unfair turns look like? They typically involved a undisrupted 4 or 5 card hand, often with equipment. So if you can provoke them, you lower the damage ceiling of their spike turns, which is exactly the type of game plan that a dual wield warrior wants to execute. So this is a card that I think you are heavily incentivized to play out all 3 and not block or pitch with, because they support your core game plan so much. Now, because it costs 1, it is a little bit awkward. However, both dual wield decks do offer some way to get around this. So Sabers has access to Unsheathed, costs 0, curves out very nicely. The Hatchet decks typically will have Grains for Vigor tokens or Tunic to use in combination. Also, you can just pitch a blue or a yellow, activate Ironsong Versus, swing, and just provoke. That's a decent 2-card hand. Now, if they do not block it, that is not great value, so you have to be very careful. But if they do block it, then provoke will get basically 2 cards for 2 cards, which is exactly what you want to do. You really need to analyze very carefully whether or not your opponent will block or not, because the value of provoke goes up if you could correctly determine that. Okay. Now there's another card in the game that says when this is defended by. So Commanding Performance is one of them. The other one is Hot Streak, and provoke might allow you to extract Go Again from hands that could not have Go Again. Most dual wield decks do not have a problem with Go Again, but having kind of a built-in Go Again against particular decks built into the blue, into a blue block there is quite good. So we could see an uptick in Hot Streak usage as well. I put Commanding Performance there again because that is a card that I think is very relevant for both. Now, Commanding Performance doesn't see it sees some play in dual wield, but we could see an uptick just like we with Dawnblade Dorinthia. So now that we've talked a little bit about Dawnblade Dorinthia and provoke in dual wield warrior, let's kind of wrap things up. So I think, like I said before, this is a card that is going to be extremely skill intensive to use properly, and the feedback loop on whether you played it correctly or not is not going to be very obvious because you can't see your opponent's hand. But you might be able to glean a little bit of information from, how much they're getting upset that they're getting disrupted, right? This is a card that I think is much, much deeper than it looks on the surface. And this is a card where you're just going to have to think very carefully about the situations that you could get into. And if you play provoke, what will happen is that a favorable situation for you. And the strategy of the deck obviously is going to dictate whether it is the correct tactic to play provoke. This is a great card to include in pretty much every warrior. I anticipate that this will be a solid 3 of in pretty much all warrior decks going forward. Majestic blue block 3s with disruption is really what we needed. This is the very first forced interaction card that we've seen LSS print. And this is a very, very elegantly and beautifully designed card that I think all the Warriors of Wraith will enjoy playing with. All right, so I think that kind of wraps it up. This card going to be pretty nuts, I think. So go buy your playset. All right, this has been Josh Law at TheCardGuyz. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Take care.